Welcome, everybody, to the Undaunted Man podcast. My name is Mark Johnson. This is my partner, Geoff Laughton. And we are here to talk to you this morning about good boy points. So, the best way to encapsulate this was actually done a few years ago by Chris Rock, when he pointed out that only women, children, and dogs are loved unconditionally. Men are loved based on what they can provide. And, he got a great laugh. It also happens to be true.
True. Yeah.
That's the thing with all great comedy. It's all based on truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what's your initial, I don't know if you've heard that joke before, Geoff. So what is your initial response to that?
Well, I guess unfortunately, I do think it's more true than not. And the problem is it's a setup. To whatever degree that's true for any woman. Because I'm always loath to say absolutes. There's always exceptions, but we both know from our practices that this is more common than not. And I think the first thing that comes to me as an inherent problem is, to the degree that would be true for a man's female partner, it sets him up for him to be infantilized, which is innately emasculating, and/or it also sets up something you and I have talked about in other episodes before, which is, if you're going to be in a relationship, unless you've made some kind of arrangement up front that we're going to be friends with benefits, or we're going to be married, but we're going to make sure that there's a power hierarchy, and thou shalt not fuck with the power hierarchy. Unless you have something like that set up, the idea of being in a committed romantic relationship is to be of mutual service, to be two individuals that are completely distinct and unique, but have things in common or things that they each value that work together. And so if Chris's joke were to be the law of the land, then why would any man want to be in that? Because there's no mutual service. It's just basically man for hire for their, for a woman's emotional and other needs.
Yeah.
That's my first thought.
Well, I think what you're describing there is an idealized version of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that he is right. And he's right beyond just romantic relationships.
Yeah.
Because it is everywhere in our culture. Everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. There's a reason why whenever there's a disaster, it's women and children first. Because men are and always have been considered disposable relative to women. Even in this supposedly enlightened time of equality and feminism, the old social conventions still apply. It's still women and children first in a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that's true is that it doesn't really, there's, how do I say this? Tiffany, please, any hemming and hawing and umming, please chop that out. We can have all the enlightened intellectual ideas that we want. We still operate from our lizard brains primarily. And attraction, especially in the sense of romantic relationship or physical or sexual attraction, is a lizard brain function for the most part, unless you're a
Right.
very aware person. And both women and men are attracted either romantically or even in terms of friendships and working relationships to useful, productive men. So, I mean, how many men have you worked with, especially in your corporate life, when you were in that world? Did you love all the men that you worked with unconditionally, or was your assessment of them and your willingness to keep them employed by your company based on their level of productivity?
Oh, absolutely the latter,
Mhm.
and rarely the former.
Right. Now even think about your friend group
Mm-hmm.
for your whole life. Have you maintained relationships with people that are useless to you?
No.
Of course not. And isn't it also true that on average you are far more, I'll say, forgiving of women that are useless than you are of men that are useless? Because your expectations for their utility in your life are completely different.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and your point right before that also sparked a thought
Mm-hmm.
that there, you and I often talk about evolutionary biology
Mm-hmm.
and the importance of understanding enough to be able to frame certain things up like this. And it occurred to me that in that framework of evolutionary biology, men's job is to, hunt and impregnate. Women's job was, just from a biological perspective, is to give birth. And then when children come along, going back in history, there certainly were many cultures, I think, where children were just the guarantee of future propagation of the species and laborers.
That's
Whether
still
they were,
true in outside of the developed world. That's still true.
yeah. So there was a real biological utility to this whole concept that men are secondary
Mm-hmm.
to women because there can be plenty of other guys that can impregnate a woman. But you can't, you certainly couldn't get pregnant historically without a man. And you
Well,
still can't. You just don't have to be in person while you're, you know,
right. When it comes to the because of the 9-month gestation period that humans have, um, one man could repopulate a village, in theory, if that's what it
right.
came to. Um, but you need a lot of women to keep a tribe alive.
Yep.
So, to a large degree, we still operate from those um, biological imperatives. We like to pretend like we don't, and a large subset of our problems in the developed world, especially in the Western world, are a direct result of us pretending like those biological imperatives don't exist. But we see how they still express themselves in social interactions and in terms of romantic attraction.
Yep.
I think we mentioned in another talk recently that on average, women are attracted to masculine men. On average, men are attracted to feminine women.
Yep.
For the last 60 years or so, we have been raising men to be more like women, to be more feminine, and raising women to be more like men and be more masculine. And as that has rippled through our societies, and this is, and there are a lot of side effects to this. What's happened? The success rate of relationships is through the
Plummeting.
floor. It's plummeting. It's getting worse every year. We can say, well, the marriage, the divorce rate has stayed pretty stable, or maybe even trending downward, but the number of marriages has plummeted, and
Yeah.
the number, we're at risk of population collapse all over the Western world. We reproduce far below replacement rate. Why? Because we have devalued producing children. We've devalued family life, and we have elevated the pursuit of economic success above all other values.
Yep. And we've we've immaturely also elevated fun. The pursuit of
Pleasure, yeah.
I want to have, that is one of the single most common issues
Mm-hmm.
that couples who work with me that have kids, either young kids or maybe their kids are a bit older.
Mm-hmm.
And, when a couple comes, I always ask them pretty right off the bat, okay, when did the issues start? What are they and when did they start? And by an overwhelming majority, the issues began when the first kid was born.
Mm-hmm.
And I poke into that. Well, it's so much work and it's so much responsibility and we're not having fun. Which, on a purely psychological level, I get it. But then I also think, well, right, grow the fuck up. Who forced you to get pregnant?
Mm-hmm.
You
Well,
in for a penny, in for a pound.
yeah, but this is again a result of these extended childhoods that we
Right.
have now, and the idea that personal responsibility, um, we'll say I would say it's a secondary consideration for a lot of people. I actually think it's beyond. I think it's tertiary at best now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so as a result of all these social changes that were all, pursued with the best of intentions, we now have measurably more measurably more masculine female population and a measurably more feminine male population. But the fundamental dynamics of attraction are the same.
Yep.
So you now have women that are successful. Actually, women are outperforming men at every level these days. They're outperforming them in education. They're at every level of education. They're outperforming them in terms of advanced degrees. They're outperforming them in terms of their career prospects. The 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 feminist revenge tour um, is complete because things have completely flipped. Doesn't mean that there aren't successful men, and it doesn't mean that there aren't feminine women. There are, but that's not the way we're training people, and that's not the social expectation anymore. Um, but the fundamental lizard brain dynamics are still in play. So if you've got a successful woman that makes her own money, is financially independent, um, and is very comfortable doing that because she is grounded in her masculine energy, and you've got men that um, are no longer needed and have been
Yep.
told their entire life, starting in preschool or with children's programming, that for them to be masculine is bad, their natural instincts are wrong, that they should sit down and be quiet and let the girls talk, stop being so assertive, stop being so aggressive, all while encouraging girls and women to be assertive and aggressive. It creates instinctual confusion
It's a great way to put it.
because you're told that your natural instincts, as a man, you're told that your
Wrong.
natural instincts are wrong.
Yep.
So your very nature is um, criticized, suppressed, repressed, demonized, and the same is true for women and girls too. By the way,
Yeah.
because being feminine is also demonized, criticized, suppressed, actively suppressed. I mean, you can see just the latest kerfuffle in popular media about the Sydney Sweeney ad. I
Oh,
mean, I mean, there's nothing more offensive to a certain segment of population than an attractive feminine woman. God forbid.
yep.
What a terrible thing. Um,
Yeah, which is also reduct. I mean, it makes not wanting to get into the whole gender binary crap, but the it presupposes incorrectly in a lot of cases that a woman or a man, can only be one way, right? Like a woman can't be feminine. The whole issue around Sydney Sweeney, because she's beautiful and feminine and has, a nice body, at least to my eyes, it means that she can only be a sex symbol. And yet she's a highly intelligent person from interviews I've read. So this is also aided and abetted by a cultural tendency to want to pigeonhole or make people and certain things strictly binary. You can't be beautiful and feminine and run a Fortune 100 company, as an example, as a
mhm.
bias, not reality. But that also creates problems, and that creates problems in romantic relationships and friendships. So there's also room here for us to open our perceptions
Mhm.
to truly a more holistic and less dualistic look at human beings.
So, from my perspective, the what you just described is kind of the militant feminist point of view. That because feminists fear that if beauty and attractiveness is valued, then they'll be there, that their competence and ability to do anything other than just be a trophy in the eyes of men will be dismissed. And I don't think that's a legitimate fear. It's always been the straw men that feminists stood up so that they could knock down. But that's also part of this is kind of a side conversation to this conversation. But there's a conversation to be had about how feminine hierarchies form. I saw something the other day where this woman was saying, well, men are competitive and hierarchical and women are not. And that is flatly
Bullshit.
wrong. That's
Right.
flatly wrong. It's just
Yep.
that male hierarchies are formed based on competence, and that competence is situational. If I'm a great mountain climber and Jeff is a great um, motorcyclist, um, Jeff is going to be at the top of the hierarchy when it comes to riding motorcycles, and I'm going to be at the top of the hierarchy when it comes to climbing mountains. And whoever's at the whoever's leading the parade at that given moment is going to flip flop depending on what the circumstances
Right.
are. Women, feminine people, have hierarchies. They're just not formed on competence in a masculine style.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I mean, masculine hierarchies are they're formed based on competence, and they are basically reinforced under the threat of physical violence. Because that's we are as men, we are physically stronger. We are the masters of physical violence.
Yep.
Women are the masters of emotional violence. And feminine hierarchies are reinforced through emotional manipulation, social ostracization. I mean, it's the Mean Girls movie,
Right.
and that that's a parody form of of just it's a parody. It's a what's the word I'm looking for? It's a comedic look at how feminine hierarchies are formed and reinforced. But like with all great comedy, it's based in truth. That is
Yep.
literally how it happens. So, what is the most threatening form a woman can take to a militant feminist? A woman that is not only competent and smart, but also beautiful and feminine.
Right. Yeah, I take your point. Maybe what I was saying was more of an aspirational, like everything you just said is true. And I wish I could remember the name of that. There was a book, two books, maybe 15 years ago, and the one for girls was Queen Bees and something, and it was a sociological and psychological study of the very thing you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And reading that back then as a male, I certainly could relate to it because I can still remember high school and junior high and seeing how that played out between girls,
Mm-hmm.
and then how boys would be manipulated or ostracized for being boys.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of horrifying,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just proliferated more and more.
Right, and that's still true. And unfortunately, because of the way men and boys form and maintain hierarchies is enforced in such a visible way. I mean, physical violence is very obvious.
Yeah.
It's highly visible. It's easy to see, which is why when it comes to even in things like domestic violence, um, in a DV situation, um, the man is always assumed to be at fault. We fear as a culture, we fear the damage that a man can do to a woman because a man can obviously do far more damage to a woman physically
Yeah.
than a woman can do to a man without assuming there are no force multipliers involved. Um, what is not considered or is rarely considered in DV situations is emotional violence, emotional manipulation, and emotional
Yeah.
pain. And men have been kind of unilaterally disarmed in those situations because any man, if they are being um, um, if they are the victim of emotional violence, if they're being manipulated or abused, he can't he's powerless to respond. A man's only option is to leave
Yeah.
because I mean typically I mean and this is bell curves and all that, but men are typically not equipped or certainly not um, temperamentally inclined to engage in the same kind of emotional jousting that women do.
Yeah.
They're not. We don't know how to do it. It's not natural for us. It's um, we're simply just not. We are as deficient in that regard compared to women as women are to men physically.
Yeah.
So, but we are. If we're being emotionally abused, who do we talk to? If we go to the cops, we get laughed at. If we go to our friends, we get laughed at. If we go on social media, we get laughed at. Our concerns are completely and utterly dismissed, and essentially we get told, even by the most progressive people, to man up, which is
Right.
hilarious. But if a man cracks and lashes out and tries to physically stop the emotional violence, he's going to jail.
Yep. Yep. And I do think you're accurate that there's a strong bias that if you're a man who genuinely is being emotionally abused, which happens way more than people would probably think or believe, there there's no question. I've seen it with people in our orbit that had been in that boat and finally took a stand, but they had a very uphill battle of even arguing for the use of that word abuse, but it happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And there, well, there is one safe place for a man to tell the truth about that, and that would be in one of our groups,
Right.
because men do talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I notice even when a man is legitimately being manipulated and emotionally and verbally abused,
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to leave the verbal part out, that it was humbling as more men would show up in our groups that were in that boat and should I stay or should I go? Um, you can see the embarrassment that they were carrying to even admit it, but they couldn't keep it in anymore.
Right. And the shame.
And yeah, oh, the
And the shame.
shame's enormous.
Hmm.
And and there's a whole other conversation about how that impacts children. But
Hmm.
to what we're talking about today, good boy points is invariably going to not only contribute to this core imbalance that we're talking about, another form of inequity, and it leaves a guy, when you add in what you said earlier about our core nature being gaslit culturally, then is it any wonder that men, they'll go to porn, they'll go to, they'll have an affair. Like, where the fuck do you go when you're in that situation
Hmm.
except numbing out in whatever way you
Hmm.
do it, whether it's porn, drugs, work,
Hmm.
um, all kinds of avenues.
Hmm.
But this is why this needs to be talked about, I think, a lot more.
Hmm. Well, men go to the same place. Abused men go to the same place that many abused women go to. And, there's been countless movies and TV movies and books written about abused women and the lengths that they will go to try to get their partner to stop abusing them, to
Right.
try to make them happy. And the tragedy of that, instead of just leaving, um, and men do the same thing. They,
Yeah.
but um, they, they turn themselves inside out trying to please their partner, hoping the abuse will stop. And
Right.
if for all those movies of men abusing women, Julia Roberts was in one. I don't know. There's been countless of them made in our lifetime.
Yeah.
The um, the man's getting away with it, consequence free, and that's always something that's emphasized in the story is how there are no consequences for the man for his brutal behavior until the end of the movie when he either gets shot or something happens.
Right.
Um, for women, it's legitimately consequence free because there are no laws, there's no support system, there's no legal support system, there are no men's shelters, or there might be one or two, but I mean, there are about 10,000 women's shelters for every one men's shelter in this country.
Right.
Um, there's literally nowhere for those men to go except an organization like ours.
Yep.
And so, there's a deeper problem. This chasing of good boy points goes back to men being absent largely from their
Yep.
children's lives from the jump. And these days, it's not only dad that's absent, and that started back in the Industrial Revolution, back in the turn of the 20th century. But now with women working outside the home, and you know, boys are raised by low-paid daycare workers, which tend to be
Yep.
female
Yep.
overwhelmingly, and then teachers, which are overwhelmingly female, um, up until, well, I would say up until college, but I think even in college, most of the teachers these days and professors these days are female.
Yep.
So they spend their lives in the um, being essentially socialized and trained to please women, to chase good boy points from women, because they do not have strong, healthy, masculine male role models around.
Yep.
And one of the byproducts of strong, healthy, masculine male role models is self-respect.
Yeah. And an orientation that's been degraded too much, it helps reinforce an orientation to accountability and integrity.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly integrity with self. And one of the things that I so appreciate about what we're giving men a space for in our groups is to be able to, once you really can feel you're safe in the group, that you can lay anything and everything out there, and at the very least know that you're not going to get attacked, you're not going to get shamed, you're not going to get further emasculated if you're a man in an emotionally abusive relationship, because that is innately emasculating. Then you get communal support for how to get yourself back, to get your dignity, your self-respect, and your responsibility for creating your own life 100%. That keeps getting reinforced,
Mm-hmm.
which probably deters a lot of men from going into men's work, whichever variety you go to. Ultimately, you're going to have to grapple with the idea of personal responsibility, including tolerating being emotionally abused.
Mm-hmm. Oh, just tolerate, and even just tolerating poor treatment in general.
Right, right. So you can go to www.theundauntedman.com and you can click on a link to find a group, one of our groups. Come check it out, virtual or live here on the Front Range, but virtual everywhere. And just like I remember pot being when I was a freshman in high school, the first one's free.